Hello, boys and girls. Today I'm going to read The Marvelous Medicine number 2 and The Marvelous Medicine number 3. This is in George's Marvelous Medicine by Roald Dahl. They were in the kitchen now, and the big stewing pot was on the stove. All the things Mr. Cranky had bought were lined up near the sink. "Come along, my boy," cried Mr. Killicranky. "Which one did you put in first?" "This one," George said. "Golden Gloss hair shampoo," and he emptied the bottle into the pot. "Now the toothpaste," George went on, "and the shaving soap, and the face cream, and the nail polish." "Keep at it, my boy," cried Mr. Cranky, dancing around the kitchen. "Keep putting them in. Don't stop, don't pause, don't hesitate. It's a pleasure, my dear fellow, to watch you work." One by one, George poured and squeezed the things into the stewing pot, and with everything so close at hand, the whole job didn't take him more than 10 minutes. But when it was all done, the pot didn't somehow seem to be quite as full as it had been the first time. "Now what did you do? What did you do?" cried Mr. Cranky. "Did you stir it?" "I boiled it," George said, "but not for long, and I stirred it as well." So Mr. Cranky lit the gas under the pot, and George stirred the mixture with the same long wooden spoon that he had used before. "It's not brown enough," George said. "Wait a minute. I know what I've forgotten." "What?" cried Mr. Cranky. "Tell me quick, because if we've forgotten even one tiny thing, then it won't work. At least not in the same way." "A quart of brown gloss paint," George said. "That's what I've forgotten." Mr. Killicranky shot out of the house and into his car like a rocket. He sped down to the village and bought the paint and rushed back again. He opened the can in the kitchen and handed it to George. George poured the paint into the stewing pot. "Aha, that's better," George said. "That's more like the right color." "It's boiling," cried Mr. Cranky. "It's boiling and bubbling, George. Is it ready yet?" "It's ready," George said. "At least I hope it is." "Right," shouted Mr. Cranky, hopping about. "Let's test it. Let's give some to a chicken." "My heavens alive, why don't you calm down a bit?" Mrs. Cranky said, coming into the kitchen. "Calm down?" cried Mr. Cranky. "You expect me to calm down, and here we are mixing up the greatest medicine ever discovered in the history of the world? Come along, George. Dip a cupful out of the pot and get a spoon, and we'll give some to a chicken just to make absolutely sure we've got the correct mixture." Outside in the yard there were several chickens that hadn't any of George's Marvelous Medicine number 1. They were pecking about in the dirt in that silly way that chickens do. George crouched down, holding out a spoonful of Marvelous Medicine number 2. "Come on, chicken," he said. "Good chicken. Chick, chick, chick." A white chicken with black specks on its feathers looked up at George. It walked over to the spoon, and it went peck. The effect that medicine number 2 had on this chicken wasn't not quite the same as the effect produced when by medicine number 1, but it was very interesting. "Whoosh!" shrieked the chicken, and it shot 6 feet up in the air and came back down again. Then sparks came flying out of its beak, bright yellow sparks of fire, as though someone was sharpening a knife on a grindstone inside its tummy. And then its legs began to grow longer. Its body stayed the same size, but the 2 thin yellow legs got longer and longer and longer and longer still. "What's happening to it?" cried Mr. Killicranky. "Something's wrong," George said. The legs went on growing, and the more they grew, the higher up into the air went the chicken's body. And when the legs were about 15 feet long, they stopped growing. The chicken looked perfectly absurd, with its long, long legs and its ordinary little body perched high up on top. It was like a chicken on stilts. "Oh, my sainted ants!" cried Mr. Killicranky. "We've got it wrong. This chicken's no good to anybody. It's all legs." "No one wants chicken legs." "I must have left something out," George said. "I know you left something out," cried Mr. Killicranky. "Think, boy, think. What was it that you left out?" "I've got it," said George. "Well, what was it? Quick." "Flea powder for dogs," George said. "You mean you put flea powder in the first one?" "Yes, Dad, I did, a whole carton of it." "Then that's the answer." "Well, wait a minute," said George. "Did we have brown shoe polish on our list?" "We did not," said Mr. Cranky. "Well, I used that too," said George. "Well, no wonder it went wrong," said Mr. Cranky, and he was already running to his car, and as soon as he was heading and soon he was heading down to the village to buy more flea powder and more shoe polish. Marvelous medicine number 3. So George's father's going to bring back the flea powder and the shoe polish. I think that's it. So here it is, cried Mr. Killycranky, rushing into the kitchen. 1 carton of flea powder for dogs and 1 can of brown shoe polish. George poured the flea powder into the giant stirring pot, and then he scooped the shoe polish out of its can and added that as well. Stir it up, George, shouted Mr. Cranky. Give it another boil. We've got it this time. I'll bet we've got it. After marvelous medicine number 3 had been boiled and stirred, George took a cupful out into the yard to try it on another chicken. Mr. Cranky ran after him, flapping his arms and hopping with excitement. Come and watch this one, he called out to Mrs. Cranky. Come and watch us turning an ordinary chicken into a lovely great big one that lays eggs as large as footballs. I hope you do better than last time, said Mr. Cranky, following them out. Come on, chicken, said George, holding out a spoonful of medicine number 3. Good chicken, chick, 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 chick. Have some of this lovely medicine. A magnificent black cockerel with a scarlet comb came stepping over, and the cockerel looked at the spoon, and it went peck. Cock-a-doodle-doo! Squawked the cockerel, shooting up into the air and coming back down again. Watch him now, cried Mr. Cranky. Watch him grow. Any moment he's going to start getting bigger and bigger. Mr. Killycranky, Mrs. Cranky, and little George stood on the yard staring at the black cockerel. And then the cockerel stood quite still. It looked as though it had a headache. What's happening to its neck? Mrs. Cranky said. It's getting longer, George said. I'll say it's getting longer, Mrs. Cranky said. And Mr. Cranky, for once, said nothing. Last time it was its legs, Mrs. Cranky said. Now it's the neck. Who wants a chicken with a long neck? You can't eat a chicken's neck. It was an extraordinary sight. The cockerel's body hadn't grown at all, but the neck was now about 6 feet long. All right, George, Mr. Cranky said. What else have you forgotten? I don't know, George said. Oh, yes, you do, Mr. Cranky said. Come on, boy, think. There's probably just one vital thing missing, and you've got to remember it. Well, I did put in some engine oil from the garage, George said. Did you have that on your list? Eureka! Cried Mr. Cranky. That's the answer. How much did you put in? Half a pint, George said. Mr. Cranky ran to the garage and found another half pint of oil. And some antifreeze, George called after him. I sloshed in a bit of antifreeze. Is there one more thing that George is missing? That was his attempt for medicine number 3. Next will be medicine number 4. Thank you for listening.